Imagine a room sealed from the outside world, airless and dim, where 100 desperate men are locked together around a single small pie. There are no windows, no doors to the outside, and no possibility of more food arriving. Every man in that room knows, with a primal certainty, that the slice another man takes is a slice removed from his own survival. And so they fight. They claw and bite and scheme. They form temporary alliances, only to betray them. They spend every waking hour watching the hands of their neighbors, counting the crumbs on their plates, calculating who is winning and who is losing. This, Wallace Wattles tells us with surgical precision, is the competitive mind. It is not merely a strategy, it is a prison. It is a worldview built entirely on the assumption that the room is all there is and that the pie is all that will ever exist. Now, hold that image in your mind and then consider a second man. This man is also in the room. He sees the fight. He understands its mechanics, but something inside him refuses to participate. He turns away from the brawl, finds a door that the others, blinded by panic, never noticed, walks through it into a vast kitchen and begins to bake. He is the creator. And Wallace Wattles wrote an entire science, a precise and uncompromising manual, to teach you how to find that door. The greatest lie ever sold to the modern human being is that wealth is a fixed, finite resource, like water in a sealed tank, like oxygen in that windowless room. This lie is so deeply embedded in the cultural operating system that most people never once question it. They absorb it from childhood, watching parents stress over bills. They reinforce it in school, where they are ranked and sorted and taught to compete for grades, as though intelligence itself were scarce. They confirm it every time they watch the news and hear language like market share, competitive advantage, and cutting out the competition. The world speaks the grammar of scarcity so fluently that it sounds like physics. It sounds like reality. But Wattles arrives, calm and unshakable, and tells you that this grammar is a lie. It is not physics. It is not reality. It is a collective hallucination, and the price of believing in it is your entire potential. The root of this failure runs deeper than strategy or tactics. It is not a matter of working harder or networking more efficiently. A man operating from the competitive mind can work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and still feel perpetually behind, perpetually threatened, perpetually exhausted. And the reason is architectural. His entire mental framework is constructed on the premise of limitation. He is, at every moment, subconsciously calculating his resources against the resources of others. This internal calculation is a drain, a constant leak in the vessel that should be holding his creative energy. The competitive man is never fully present in his own vision because he is perpetually scanning the horizon for threats. His attention is divided at the root, and divided attention produces diminished results, no matter how hard the body works. Wattles does not soften this diagnosis. He does not offer a compromise position. He does not suggest that you compete a little less or that you try to be slightly more positive. His prescription is total and absolute. To get rich in the certain way, you must wholly and completely abandon the competitive mind, not reduce it, not manage it. Abandon it. This is not motivational language. It is structural engineering. You cannot build a cathedral on a cracked foundation by adding more marble. You must first remove the crack. And the crack, Wattles tells us, is the belief that supply is limited, that someone else's gain necessitates your loss, that the pie in that sealed room is the only pie that will ever exist. Remove this belief entirely, and the architecture of everything you build afterward changes at a fundamental level. In this documentary, we are not going to give you another motivational speech. We are not going to ask you to visualize harder or believe more. We are going to do something far more precise and far more powerful. We are going to step off the battlefield entirely, leave the desperate arena where men fight over crumbs, and walk together into the laboratory where Wattles constructed his science. You are going to understand, at a structural and philosophical level, what the thinking stuff secret actually is, where it comes from, why it works, and how the simple act of shifting from the competitive plane to the creative plane can alter the entire trajectory of your financial and personal reality. This is not metaphor for its own sake. This is a map. The map we are following was drawn by a man who arrived at these conclusions not through inherited privilege or lucky circumstance, but through decades of poverty, failure, and relentless intellectual inquiry. Wallace Wattles spent most of his life on the losing side of the competitive economy. He knew hunger. He knew the particular humiliation of watching others succeed while he struggled. And it was precisely because he lived inside the problem so intimately that his eventual solution carries such weight. He did not theorize from comfort. He excavated truth from the rubble of his own experience. And what he found, he organized into a science so rigorous that he titled his book, not with inspiration, but with precision, The Science of Getting Rich. A science has laws, a science has principles, and a science can be learned and applied by anyone willing to follow its methodology. Before we begin, there is a commitment required of you. Not a financial commitment, not a time commitment, but an intellectual one. You must be willing, for the duration of this journey, to genuinely suspend the competitive framework that has likely governed your thinking since childhood. You do not have to permanently abandon your skepticism, but for the next hour, be willing to entertain the possibility that the room is not sealed, that the pie is not the only pie, and that the kitchen has always been there waiting. If you can make that single commitment, what follows will not merely inform you, it will restructure you. Stay with us. The thinking stuff secret begins now. To understand Wallace Wattles' central claim, you must first be willing to look at the universe not as a collection of separate, solid, independent objects, but as a single, continuous field of potential. This is not mysticism invented for comfort. It is the starting premise of Wattles' entire system, and it is a premise that, when genuinely internalized, dissolves the foundational assumption of scarcity at its very root. The universe, as Wattles frames it, is not a closed box with a predetermined fixed amount of wealth distributed unevenly among its inhabitants. It is something far more dynamic, far more generous, and far more responsive than that model allows. He calls this foundational substance the original formless substance, the raw material from which every physical thing that has ever existed was first shaped. And the first most critical thing you must understand about this substance is that it is not scarce. It is not running out. It is not being depleted by the ambitions of 7 billion human beings. It is, in its essential nature, inexhaustible. Consider what this actually means when you sit with it carefully. Every mountain range on this planet contains minerals, metals, and compounds that human civilization has barely begun to extract or even identify. Scientists estimate that the ocean floor holds more gold than has been mined in the entirety of human history. The soil beneath any given square mile of undeveloped land contains biological and chemical wealth that could sustain life in ways our current economy has not yet imagined. And this is merely the physical dimension of what Wattles is pointing toward. He is not simply saying that natural resources are abundant, though that observation alone is sufficient to shatter the scarcity myth. He is saying something far deeper, that the substance from which all physical resources ultimately emerge, the formless substance, the thinking stuff, is itself infinite. It has no bottom, it has no ceiling, it has no wall. And here is where the idea begins to carry genuine transformative weight. Wattles does not describe this formless substance as inert raw material, like clay waiting passively to be shaped by external hands. He describes it as alive, as thinking, as inherently responsive to the impressions of thought placed upon it. This is the axis around which his entire science rotates. The universe is not a passive warehouse. It is an active, intelligent medium that responds to the quality and clarity of the thoughts you project into it. When a clear, specific, deeply held thought is impressed upon this substance with consistency and faith, the substance begins to organize itself around that thought. It begins to arrange circumstances, open channels, and mobilize resources in alignment with the mental image you have provided. You are not discovering pre-existing wealth and claiming it before someone else does. You are instructing an infinite intelligence to generate new wealth specifically calibrated to your vision. This is a radical departure from any conventional economic theory, and it is worth pausing here to feel the full weight of that departure. Every conventional model of wealth creation is built on the same foundational assumption. Resources are finite, competition is inevitable, and success requires either superior strategy in claiming existing wealth or, at best, more efficient use of limited materials. Wattles steps entirely outside this model and proposes something that sounds, at first, almost too generous to be true. He proposes that the raw material of wealth is not land, labor, or capital, as classical economics defines them. The raw material of wealth is thought, and thought impresses itself upon a medium that has no limits. This is not a poetic metaphor for positive thinking. It is Wattles' literal claim about the physics of reality. Now, most people encounter this idea and immediately raise the same objection. If this were true, why isn't everyone rich? Why do people suffer? Why does scarcity exist at all if the supply is genuinely infinite? This is not a naive objection. It is exactly the right question, and Wattles addresses it with characteristic directness. The answer, he tells us, is not that the supply is limited. The answer is that most people are not accessing the supply correctly. They are not thinking in alignment with the formless substance. They are thinking in the grammar of competition and lack, and in doing so, they are cutting themselves off from the very channel through which abundance flows. It is as though they are standing in front of an unlimited reservoir of fresh water, but they have filled the pipe with concrete. The water exists, the abundance is real, but the channel is blocked by the very thoughts that were supposed to carry the flow. Think of it this way: a radio receiver does not create radio waves. Radio waves already fill the room you are sitting in right now, invisible and constant. The receiver's only function is to tune itself to the correct frequency. When it is properly tuned, the signal appears as though from nowhere, clear and full. When it is mistuned, there is only static. Wattles is telling you that you are a receiver and that the frequency of the formless substance is always broadcasting. The broadcast never stops. The abundance never pauses. The question is never whether the supply is there. The question is whether you are tuned to receive it, and the competitive mind, with its perpetual static of fear and scarcity, is the worst possible tuning. It is the maximum mismatch between the receiver and the signal. Let us push this metaphor further, because it rewards deeper examination. When you are operating in the competitive mind, you are not merely failing to receive the signal. You are actively broadcasting interference. Every thought of lack, every anxious calculation about what your competitor is doing, every fearful assessment of the economy, the market, the political landscape. These are not neutral observations. They are frequencies you are projecting into the formless substance. And Wattles is explicit: the substance responds to thought. If the thought you consistently project is one of scarcity, the substance, faithful to its nature, begins to organize reality around that scarcity. This is not punishment. It is not cosmic indifference. It is the neutral, precise mechanics of a system that simply reflects back what is placed into it. You are, at every moment, either constructing or dismantling your own abundance. There is a dimension of this concept that almost never gets discussed in popular treatments of Wattles' work, and it is perhaps the most intellectually demanding aspect of his entire framework. He is not saying that positive thinking alone is sufficient. He is not saying that if you simply feel good about money, money will appear. The process he describes is far more structured and far more disciplined than that. The impression you make upon the formless substance must be clear. It must be specific. It must be held with genuine conviction, not manufactured enthusiasm, but the deep, settled certainty that comes from truly understanding the nature of the supply you are drawing from. Vague wishes make vague impressions. Desperate hoping is still rooted in the fear of not having, which is still the competitive mind wearing different clothes. What is required is precision of vision, combined with the calm confidence of someone who knows, architecturally, that the foundation beneath them is infinite. Wattles illustrates this with an image that is worth dwelling on at length. He speaks of the unmined gold still sleeping in the mountains, the unharvested timber in the forests, the potential energy locked in the rivers, the vast, untapped biological intelligence of the ocean. He is not speaking romantically. He is making a mathematical point. At any given moment in human history, The total wealth that has been extracted and circulated among human beings represents a fraction, a genuinely small fraction, of the total wealth available in the physical dimension alone. And the physical dimension is itself merely one expression of the formless substance. If the physical world, which is only the crystallized outer shell of this infinite medium, already contains more than enough for every human being who has ever lived or will ever live, then the claim that there is a shortage of wealth is not merely wrong. It is geometrically, cosmically wrong. It is an error of such magnitude that it takes genuine intellectual humility to absorb its full implications. And yet, this is the error upon which the entire competitive plane is built. The man fighting over the pie in that sealed room is not stupid. He is not lazy. He is not without talent or drive. He is operating with a false map. He genuinely believes that the room is all there is. He has been given no evidence to the contrary. Or rather, the evidence has been there all along, but his framework has made him constitutionally unable to see it. The first and most revolutionary act available to you right now, in this very moment, is not a new business plan or a new investment strategy. It is the willingness to look up from the pie, turn away from the fight, and acknowledge the simple, staggering possibility that the kitchen is real, that the ingredients are infinite, and that you have always had the right to walk through that door. This is why Wattles frames his work as a science and not as philosophy or theology, though it draws from both. Science deals in repeatable, teachable processes. Science says, if you do this, you will observe that result. And Wattles's claim is precisely this scientific. Any person, regardless of background, education, current financial state, or geographic location, who genuinely learns to think in alignment with the formless substance, to hold a clear mental image of the wealth they intend to create, to act with confident purpose on the physical opportunities that arise, and to maintain absolute faith in the infinite nature of the supply, will get rich, not as a possibility, not as a probability, as a certainty. The same way that a seed planted in fertile soil with adequate water and sunlight will with certainty produce a plant. The process is not magic, it is mechanics. Now consider what this means for your daily experience of the world. If Wattles is correct, then every moment you spend in competitive anxiety is not merely unpleasant, but is a literal misdirection of the most powerful creative tool you possess, your focused thought. Every hour you spend monitoring your competitors, calculating their advantages over you, stewing in resentment over what they have and you lack, is an hour in which you are actively reinforcing the false map. You are printing the lie in bold letters across the territory of your mind. And the formless substance, responsive as always, reads those bold letters and begins to build the scenery that matches them. This is the terrible irony at the heart of the competitive mind. The very strategies it employs to overcome scarcity perpetuate it. The fear of lack produces the experience of lack with the cold reliability of a natural law. There is a practical test you can apply right now to measure where you are on this spectrum. Think about your primary source of income, your business, your career, your craft. When you think about it, what is the dominant emotional register of your thoughts? Is it expansion, vision, and the eager anticipation of what you are building? Or is it a constant low-grade anxiety about competitors, market conditions, economic uncertainty, and the possibility that someone else might take what should be yours? Be ruthlessly honest. Most people, if they sit with this question sincerely, will discover that the dominant register is the second one, the one soaked in the grammar of scarcity. This is not a reason for shame. It is a precise diagnosis. And a precise diagnosis is the beginning of a precise cure. The cure, as Wattles prescribes it, is not behavioral modification. You cannot fix a mistuned receiver by forcing it to produce different sounds. You fix it by adjusting the tuning mechanism itself. The tuning mechanism is your fundamental understanding of the nature of supply. When you truly, structurally understand that the formless substance is infinite, that it is intelligent, that it is responsive, and that there is literally no scenario in which someone else's wealth diminishes your access to yours, the anxiety does not need to be managed. It dissolves, not because you suppressed it, but because it has lost its logical foundation. Fear of scarcity cannot survive genuine comprehension of abundance. This is the liberation that Wattles is offering, and it begins not with action, but with understanding. This understanding is the foundation of the entire creative plane. Everything that follows in Wattles' system, every principle, every practice, every directive about thought and action and gratitude rests on this single bedrock insight. The supply is infinite. You are not competing for a share of existing wealth. You are drawing new wealth into existence from a substance that has never run short, never played favorites, and never once punished a human being for daring to want more. The universe is not your adversary. It is not indifferent to your hunger. It is, by its very nature, the most generous partner imaginable, waiting with unlimited patience and unlimited resources for the moment you stop fighting over the pie and ask it, clearly and confidently, to help you bake your own. If the infinite nature of the formless substance is the foundation, then the mechanics of creation are the architecture built upon it. And understanding this architecture in precise detail is what separates the man who reads Wattles and feels inspired from the man who reads Wattles and actually gets rich. The mechanics begin with a single, deceptively simple statement. You do not need to take from any other person what you intend to have. This is not merely a moral principle, though it has moral implications. It is a statement about the physics of the system. Wattles is telling you that the very act of taking, of competing, of maneuvering to claim a larger slice of existing wealth is a mechanical error. It is like trying to charge your phone by drawing power from your neighbor's battery rather than plugging into the grid. The grid is right there. It is infinite. And the act of stealing from your neighbor's battery not only diminishes him unnecessarily, but actively disconnects you from the grid in the process. The mechanical process, Wattles describes, begins in the mind, and it begins with what he calls the clear mental image. This is not a passive daydream. It is not a mood board of aspirational images. It is a precise, detailed, consistently held mental picture of the specific thing you intend to bring into physical reality. The clarity of this image is not a stylistic preference. It is a functional requirement. The formless substance, being intelligent and responsive, reads the impression you make upon it with exactitude. A blurry impression produces a blurry result, in the same way that a blurry photographic negative produces a blurry print. The image you hold in your mind is the negative. The formless substance is the darkroom, and the physical circumstances of your life are the print that emerges. The quality of the print is entirely determined by the quality of the negative. This is why Wattles spends considerable effort distinguishing between wishing and thinking. A wish is a momentary, emotionally colored desire that arises and dissolves without leaving a deep impression. A sustained, specific mental image, held in the context of absolute faith in the infinite supply, is something fundamentally different. It is a command, not a plea to a distant deity, not a request submitted for consideration, but a direct instruction delivered to an intelligence that, by its nature, must organize itself in response. This might sound grandiose, but Wattles frames it in the plainest possible terms. He says that thought is the only power that can produce tangible riches from the formless substance. If thought is the mechanism, then the quality of your thinking is literally the quality of your tools. A carpenter who uses dull tools produces poor furniture. A mind that thinks in vague, fearful, competitive terms produces a life that reflects those terms. Now, some of the most intellectually honest objections to this framework center on the question of physical action. If thought impresses the formless substance, is action even necessary? Do you simply think your vision clearly enough and then wait for wealth to materialize at your doorstep? Wattles is emphatic on this point. No. The creative process requires action, but it requires a specific quality of action that is fundamentally different from the frantic, competitive scrambling of the man in the sealed room. Wattles describes it as moving upon the things around you. The formless substance, once impressed by your clear mental image, begins to arrange circumstances and open channels. Your role is to move with confident, purposeful action through those circumstances and channels as they appear, doing each thing that is immediately available to you in the present moment, with the full faith that the next step will be revealed as you complete the current one. Think of this as navigation by starlight rather than navigation by searchlight. The competitive man uses a searchlight. He sweeps it frantically across the terrain, trying to illuminate the entire path before he takes a single step. He wants certainty before commitment. He wants proof before investment. And because the searchlight can only reach so far, he is perpetually paralyzed by the darkness beyond its beam. The creator navigates by starlight. He cannot see the entire road, but the star he is following is fixed, clear, and unmistakably bright. He takes the next step revealed by its light, then the next, trusting not that he can see the full journey, but that the direction is correct, and that the formless substance, which organized his destination, is also organizing the path. This trust is not naivety, it is the logical consequence of understanding the nature of the supply. There is a quality that Wattles associates with this kind of action that deserves its own careful examination. He calls it efficient action. Efficiency in the conventional competitive sense means doing more with less, maximizing output per unit of input, optimizing the extraction of value from finite resources. In Wattles' sense, efficiency has a different and more profound meaning. Efficient action is action that is fully present, fully intentional, and fully aligned with the mental image you are holding. It is the opposite of busyness, which is the competitive mind's way of appearing productive while remaining anxious. The creator does not perform 3 activities half-heartedly while worrying about a 4th. He does the single thing in front of him with complete attention, complete craftsmanship, and complete confidence that this specific act is a step in the organized sequence that the formless substance is arranging on his behalf. Consider the practical difference between these 2 modes of action when applied to, say, building a business. The competitive entrepreneur spends his days monitoring competitors, adjusting his prices reactively, copying strategies that worked for others, fearing disruption, and measuring his progress exclusively in terms of his position relative to others in his market. His energy is perpetually dispersed across a landscape of threats. The creative entrepreneur, by contrast, has a clear, specific vision of the value he intends to deliver. He is not watching his competitors because he is not trying to take their market. He is drawing new value into existence, creating new customers who did not previously know they needed what he offers, expanding the total available wealth rather than redistributing it. His energy is concentrated and forward-moving. These are not just different strategies, they are different universes of operation. The mechanics of creation also include what Wattles describes as the element of personal transactions, specifically the principle that in every transaction you enter, you must convey to the other party a use value greater than the cash value they give you in return. This is not charity, it is structural alignment with the creative plane. When you give more than you take in every exchange, you are introducing a net increase of value into the world. With every single transaction you complete, you are not redistributing existing wealth, you are adding to the total pool. And every addition you make to the total pool is, in mechanical terms, a contribution to the formless substance's ongoing project of organizing abundance. You become, in a very real sense, a collaborator with the universe rather than a competitor within it. The universe, which is always moving toward more life, more expression, more abundance, naturally favors those who are aligned with its direction of travel. Let us examine this principle of use value more concretely, because it has the power to transform how you think about every product, service, and interaction you're involved in. When a customer pays you $100, Wattles is not saying that you should give them $100 worth of goods. He is saying that what you deliver must be worth significantly more to them in actual use, in the real impact it has on their life, than what they paid. If you sell a course that teaches a skill that allows someone to earn an extra $1,000 a year, and you charge them $200, you have given them 5 times more in use value than you took in cash value. That customer leaves the transaction richer, not poorer. You have not redistributed wealth, you have created it. And the 100 customers who had that same experience collectively represent a net creation of value that did not exist before you built that course. This is the creative plane operating at its most visible and measurable. Now expand this principle outward. Every employee you make richer through fair wages and meaningful work, every supplier you pay promptly and generously, every customer whose life you improve beyond what they paid for, is a node in a network of created wealth that flows outward from your creative vision. The competitive entrepreneur sees his employees as costs to be minimized, his suppliers as adversaries to be squeezed, and his customers as targets to be converted. He is at every node of this network, extracting rather than creating. And the tragedy is not merely moral but mechanical. Every extraction narrows the channel. Every act of giving more than you take widens it. The wealthy creator is not wealthy despite his generosity. He is wealthy because his generosity is the precise mechanism through which the formless substance's infinite supply flows into physical form. At the deepest level, what Wattles is describing is a fundamental shift in your relationship with the concept of abundance itself. The competitive mind treats abundance as something to be captured, like a wild animal that might escape if you do not move fast enough and with enough force. The creative mind treats abundance as something to be channeled, like a river that flows where it is directed, indefinitely and without fatigue. The river does not need to be chased. It does not need to be wrestled into submission. It needs a clear, well-constructed channel. And the channel is made of precisely the things Wattles prescribes: clear mental images, absolute faith in infinite supply, efficient and purposeful action, and transactions that increase the net wealth of everyone involved. Build the channel correctly, and the river flows. The mechanics are not mysterious. They are, as Wattles promised, a science. There is one further mechanical element that must be addressed before we move forward, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all: the role of time, or more precisely, the role of patience in the creative process. The formless substance, when impressed by a clear thought, does not always respond at the speed the competitive mind demands. And the competitive mind, accustomed to the frantic pace of the arena, interprets any delay as evidence that the process is not working. This interpretation is the single most common point of failure in the application of Wattles' science. When results do not appear on the timeline anxiety has prescribed, the doubting mind reactivates the competitive framework. It begins to monitor, to compare, to fear, and in doing so, it muddles the impression on the formless substance with new static. The channel narrows, the flow slows, and the doubter concludes incorrectly that the system does not work, when in fact the system was working perfectly until the doubt interfered. The creator's understanding of time is structural, not emotional. He knows that certain things take time to grow, not because the supply is slow to respond, but because physical reality has its own organic rhythms of manifestation. A seed does not become a tree because you are impatient with it. Impatience does not accelerate the process. What it does do reliably is introduce the anxious, grasping energy of scarcity into a process that requires the calm, confident energy of abundance. Wattles compares this to the rhythm of advance and consolidation that occurs in all natural growth. There are moments of rapid, visible expansion, and there are moments of quiet, invisible integration when the growth is happening below the surface, where no impatient eye can see it. The creator understands both rhythms and honors both with equal equanimity, because he knows that the supply driving both is the same: infinite, reliable, and entirely indifferent to the emotional weather above the soil. Bring all of this together, and what emerges is a picture not of a passive dreamer floating in abstract positivity, but of a highly disciplined, deeply purposeful architect of reality. The creator is not someone to whom things happen. He is someone who happens to things, but in a manner so aligned with the nature of the formless substance that his actions do not feel like competition or struggle. They feel like collaboration. They feel like the natural unfolding of a plan that was always going to succeed, because it was never built on the false foundation of scarcity. This is the architecture of the creative plane: infinite supply, clear mental image, faithful and efficient action, generous transactions, and patient trust in the process. Each of these elements is a load-bearing wall. Remove any one of them, and the structure weakens. Hold all of them in place with consistency and conviction, and what you are building is not just financial wealth. You are building a life organized by a fundamentally different relationship with reality itself. James Allen, whose work on the inner life of the human mind stands as one of the great companion texts to Wattles' science, offered a principle that lands with the precision of a scalpel. As a man thinks, so he is. Not as he pretends to think, not as he aspires to think, but as he actually thinks, in the private, unguarded moments when the performance is dropped and the true inner monologue runs freely. Alan taught that a man does not simply have thoughts the way he might have possessions, items stored in a drawer that can be changed at will. He is his thoughts. They constitute his character, and his character is the invisible field that determines what his life attracts and repels. This is not a metaphor for self-esteem. It is a description of a precise law. A man whose internal identity is built on the grammar of lack, who thinks in the frequency of scarcity and competition, is broadcasting that frequency into every interaction, every decision, and every creative endeavor he attempts. And the universe, as both Alan and Wattles agree, is nothing if not a faithful mirror. Here is the connection that makes both men's work suddenly, startlingly practical. When you operate on the competitive plane, your internal identity, the deepest characterological truth of who you are in relation to wealth is one of fear. Specifically, the fear of not having enough. You may dress it in the costume of ambition. You may call it drive or hustle or competitiveness, but underneath the costume, the emotional architecture is fear-based. And an identity built on fear of not having enough is perpetually, silently screaming into the fabric of reality. There is not enough. I am not enough. The supply will run out before I get mine. Alan would say that this is the character you have built, and Wattles would say that this is the impression you are making on the formless substance. Two men, two frameworks, one devastating diagnosis. The competitive mind is broadcasting lack, and the universe is broadcasting it back. Now consider the internal identity of the creator. He is not fearless in the sense of being reckless or indifferent to outcomes. He is fearless in a much more specific and structural sense. He has genuinely understood that there is no scarcity to fear. His identity is not built on defiance of the competitive landscape. It is built on a comprehension that the landscape itself is not what he was told it was. The creator does not need to suppress his fear through willpower or motivational self-talk. His understanding has simply removed the foundation on which fear was resting. And this, Alan would tell us, is the construction of genuine character. Not the suppression of negative traits through force of will, but their dissolution through the illumination of their false premises. When you truly understand that the supply is infinite, the fear of shortage becomes as absurd as the fear of drowning in a desert. The landscape does not support it. The practical implication of this identity shift is enormous and often overlooked. Alan's principle of attraction, that you attract who you are rather than what you want, means that the quality of opportunities, relationships, and circumstances that enter your life is a direct reflection of your characterological frequency. The man whose character broadcasts fear and scarcity attracts partners who reinforce scarcity, circumstances that confirm limitation, and opportunities that feel small and hard-won, not because the universe is punishing him, but because he is, in the most literal sense, a receiver tuned to that frequency. The creator, whose character broadcasts abundance and confident expectation, attracts partners who amplify expansion, circumstances that confirm infinite possibility, and opportunities that seem to the competitive man watching from outside almost suspiciously generous. What looks like luck from the outside is alignment from the inside. Alan also taught something directly relevant to the transition Wattles is asking you to make, which is this: character is not changed by changing circumstances. It is changed by changing thought. The competitive man who achieves financial success without changing his internal identity does not become a creator. He simply becomes a competitive man with more resources, more anxiety, more vigilance, and a higher stakes arena. History is populated with men who fought their way to great wealth and then spent every subsequent year in the same exhausting vigilance they practiced when they were struggling, because the wealth changed the arena, but not the character. The creator does not wait for wealth to change his internal state. He changes his internal state, and wealth follows as the natural mechanical consequence of that change. This is the sequence Alan and Wattles are pointing to in unison. First, the inner identity, then the outer reality. Always in that order. There is a subtlety in Alan's concept of character that makes it even more directly applicable to Wattles's mechanics than it might first appear. Alan observed that it is not the grand, dramatic thoughts that define a man's character, but the habitual ones. It is the thought that plays on repeat in the background of daily life, the low-level, persistent narrative that runs beneath conscious awareness that truly constitutes who a man is. This is the thought that is impressing itself on Wattles's formless substance most powerfully, because it is the most consistent thought, the deepest groove worn into the mind's landscape. A man who consciously repeats affirmations of abundance in the morning, but spends the rest of the day in habitual competitive anxiety, is not, in Alan's terms, a man of abundant character. He is a man of anxious character with a morning ritual. The formless substance reads the depth of the groove, not the freshness of the surface. This insight raises the difficulty to its proper height. The shift from competitive mind to creative mind is not a single decision made in a moment of inspiration. It is the gradual, deliberate restructuring of habitual thought. It is the patient work of noticing every moment the competitive grammar activates, every thought of shortage, every comparison to a rival's progress, every anxious calculation about the economy, and redirecting the mind, not through suppression, but through genuine re-understanding. Every time you catch the competitive thought and consciously return to the truth of infinite supply, you are reducing the depth of the old groove and beginning to carve a new one. Alan would call this the building of character. Wattles would call it the training of thought. They are describing the same process from two complementary angles, and between them, they leave you with no ambiguity about what the work actually requires. Consider the man who has absorbed this principle and applied it consistently over months. His habitual thought is no longer organized around scarcity and competition. The groove in his mind runs toward clarity, expansion, and creative vision. When he walks into a business meeting, the subtle signals he broadcasts through his language, his posture, his emotional tone, his quality of attention, are signals of a creator. And other people, who are themselves receivers tuned to various frequencies, detect these signals, often without knowing they are doing so. They experience him as someone worth trusting, someone with genuine vision, someone who is going somewhere that they want to be part of. This is not charisma in the conventional sense. It is Alan's law of attraction operating at the characterological level. The creator does not merely think differently from the competitor. He is different, and that difference, invisible to the eye, is the most powerful marketing, the most effective networking, and the most reliable recruiting tool available to any human being in the arena of wealth creation. The final piece of the Alan Wattles bridge is this. Alan taught that the outer conditions of a man's life, however fixed and immovable they may appear, are always in the process of being built or dismantled by the inner conditions of his character. This is Wattles' mechanics rendered in Alan's language. The outer life is downstream of the inner identity. Change the identity, and the outer life must follow, because the outer life is a physical expression of the inner character, in the same way that every building is a physical expression of the architect's blueprint. You do not improve a building by painting its walls. You improve it by revising its blueprint. And the blueprint of your external financial life is your internal characterological identity. Specifically, whether that identity is organized around the grammar of scarcity and competition or the grammar of abundance and creation. Wattles gives you the physics. Alan gives you the psychology. Together, they give you the complete architecture of the transformation. Now, you may be wondering what this looks like in the most ordinary moments of daily life. Not in moments of strategic deliberation or meditative clarity, but in the Tuesday afternoon moments when the bills are due, when the competitor just landed the contract you wanted, when the economy is doing exactly what the gloomy news predicted. These are the moments that reveal the true depth of your characterological shift. The competitive man, in these moments, collapses into the scarcity narrative. The creative man, in these same moments, holds his mental image with a steadiness that can only come from genuine, structural understanding of infinite supply. Not performed positivity, not denial of difficulty, but the settled, architecturally grounded certainty that these moments are surface weather, and that the deep current of abundance upon which he is building is entirely unaffected by surface weather. This is the identity Wattles is asking you to inhabit. And Alan is telling you precisely how it gets built, one habitual thought at a time. There is something worth naming about the relationship between the competitive identity and the emotion of resentment, because it is one of the most insidious ways the competitive mind perpetuates itself. When a man on the competitive plane watches another man succeed, the success feels like a subtraction, because on the competitive model, every gain for another is a relative loss for himself. This generates resentment, which generates the kind of thinking that darkens and narrows the mental image. You cannot hold a clear, expansive vision of your own creative future while simultaneously resenting the success of others. The two mental states are structurally incompatible. Resentment is perhaps the most potent form of competitive thinking because it does not feel like fear, it feels like justice. It masquerades as righteous discernment. But its mechanical effect is identical to fear. It narrows the channel, muddles the impression, and tethers the mind to the scarcity framework from which you are trying to escape. The creator's response to another person's success is not performed gratitude or diplomatic neutrality. It is genuine, almost curious interest. When a true creator sees another person thriving, their first instinct is to understand the mechanism of that thriving, because they know that the formless substance which organized that success is the same infinite supply from which they are drawing their own. Another person's wealth does not diminish their access to wealth any more than another person's breath diminishes the air available to them. This understanding does not require saintly virtue. It requires only accurate information about the nature of supply. When the competitive premise is genuinely removed from the equation, resentment has no logical foundation to rest on. It dissolves along with the scarcity myth that produced it, and what fills the space it leaves behind is something far more productive. Focused, clear, expansive, creative energy directed entirely toward your own vision. We have now seen the Alan Wattles connection in its full depth, and the picture it paints is both demanding and enormously liberating. Demanding, because it requires not just intellectual agreement with the principle of abundance, but the patient, daily work of restructuring your habitual identity around it. Liberating, because it reveals that the obstacle between you and the wealth you intend to create is not external. It is not the economy, not your competitors, not your starting circumstances, not the unfairness of the market. The obstacle is a characterological identity built on false premises, and false premises, when genuinely examined and found to be false, lose their power. You are not climbing a mountain. You are discovering that what you thought was a mountain was a shadow on a flat plain, and that the plain has always been navigable. Alan drew the map of the inner landscape. Wattles gave you the compass. Between them, they have left you no excuse for staying on the competitive plane. In an earlier exploration of Wattles' work, we discussed what can be called the frictionless way, the principle that the path to wealth, when navigated correctly, has a quality of ease and flow to it that is entirely foreign to the competitive experience. That discussion becomes even more illuminating when viewed through the lens we have just been examining, because competition, seen clearly, is not merely one of many possible obstacles to frictionless progress. It is the source of all friction. It is the fundamental category of interference that Wattles' entire system is designed to eliminate. When you fully grasp this, the imperative to abandon the competitive mind becomes not just philosophically appealing, but practically urgent. You are not being asked to be less aggressive out of moral consideration. You are being shown that competition is mechanically inefficient, that it is the single greatest drag on your creative velocity, and that eliminating it is the single highest leverage improvement you can make to your entire system of wealth creation. Consider what friction actually is in physical terms. It is the energy lost to resistance when two surfaces move against each other. Every joule consumed by friction is a joule that does not contribute to the desired motion. In a perfectly frictionless system, all of the energy you input is converted directly into the movement you intend. No waste, no drag, no heat generated by opposition. Now map this onto the competitive mind. When you are operating on the competitive plane, a significant fraction of your total energy is consumed not by creation, but by opposition. You spend energy watching rivals. You spend energy defending your position. You spend energy managing the anxiety that arises from believing your share of wealth is perpetually under threat. You spend energy in the emotional recovery from perceived losses. None of this energy contributes to the forward motion of your creative vision. It is all heat, it is all waste, it is all friction. Now consider what happens when you ascend to the creative plane. The sources of friction do not merely diminish, they cease to exist as categories. A creator does not have rivals in the competitive sense because he is not trying to take anything from anyone. He is introducing new value into the world, and new value has no natural opponent. You cannot compete with someone who is not playing the same game you are. The creator is playing an entirely different game, one in which there are no adversaries, only collaborators and customers, and the infinite generosity of the formless substance. Without adversaries, the defensive expenditure of energy disappears entirely. Without the need to monitor and respond to rivals, the attention that was divided is now fully unified. And unified attention, directed toward a single, clear, creative vision, is exponentially more powerful than divided attention, regardless of the raw quantity of hours worked. This is the point that most productivity advice and business strategy literature completely misses, because most of it is still operating within the competitive framework. It tells you how to be a better competitor, how to monitor your rivals more efficiently, how to defend your position more cleverly, but it never challenges the framework itself. Wattles challenges the framework itself, and in doing so he reveals that the goal is not to become the most effective fighter in the arena. The goal is to exit the arena entirely, so that the energy you were burning on fighting is rerouted into creating. This is not a marginal improvement. It is a categorical transformation of your energy budget, and its effects on your output, your speed, and your quality of life are proportionately dramatic. There is a spatial metaphor in Wattles that captures this beautifully: the blinders. Not the mental blinders of avoidance or denial, but the blinders of a racehorse, which prevent the horse from seeing the other horses running beside it, not to protect the horse from fear, but to protect the horse's focus from distraction. A horse looking sideways at its competition is a horse that is not fully committed to the line ahead. Its stride is compromised. Its speed is reduced. The blinders do not make the other horses disappear. They make them irrelevant, which in practical terms amounts to the same thing. Wattles tells you to put on these mental blinders, not as an act of ignorance, but as an act of engineering. You are designing your attentional system for maximum creative velocity by removing the lateral drag of competitive awareness. When you implement this in practice, the results can be disorienting at first, because so much of modern professional culture is organized around competitive awareness. Industry reports, competitor analyses, market positioning, benchmarking against peers. These are the tools of the competitive professional, and they are so normalized that abandoning them can feel irresponsible. But watch what happens to a business, a career, or a creative project when the practitioner genuinely stops looking sideways and commits all attention forward. The quality of the work increases because the attention driving it is undivided. The innovation accelerates because the mind is no longer constrained by what competitors have already done, constrained to imitation and incremental improvement rather than genuine creation. The customer relationship deepens because the creator is thinking about the customer's actual needs rather than about positioning relative to alternatives. The elimination of competitive friction also has profound effects on the speed of decision-making. The competitive mind is, by structural necessity, slow to decide, because every decision must be calculated not only for its intrinsic merits, but for its relative positioning effects. How will this price change affect our competitive position? How will this product launch be perceived relative to what our rivals are doing? How will this public statement land in the context of ongoing industry competition? Every decision requires not just internal analysis, but external triangulation, and that triangulation adds a layer of complexity, delay, and compromise to every choice. The creative mind makes decisions based on a single criterion. Does this align with and advance the vision? If yes, proceed. If no, do not. The simplicity of this criterion is not naivety. It is the extreme efficiency of a system that has eliminated the need for triangulation by eliminating the framework that made triangulation necessary. Let us talk about speed in a broader sense, because Wattles makes a claim about the creative plane that is worth examining in detail. He says that when you ascend from competition to creation, your speed multiplies. He does not say it improves slightly. He does not say that you become more efficient at the margins. He says it multiplies. This is a strong claim, and it is worth understanding mechanically why it is true, rather than simply accepting it as inspiration. The multiplication of speed on the creative plane comes from three simultaneous changes. First, the elimination of the energy drain of competitive monitoring. Second, the alignment of the formless substances organizing intelligence behind your vision, which means the path of least resistance is now genuinely flowing in your direction. And third, the quality of focus that unified attention makes possible, which produces not just more work but better work, work that creates more use value per unit of effort and therefore advances the vision faster per hour invested. Think about the last time you were in a state of complete, undistracted creative focus. Not the performance of focus in a competitive context, but genuine, joyful, absorbed engagement with something you were building. Most people can identify such a moment, even if it has been years since they experienced it. In that state, time behaves differently. Problems that normally feel intractable resolve themselves with unexpected ease. Connections between ideas appear spontaneously. The quality of output is noticeably higher than in normal working conditions. Psychologists call this state flow. Wattles would recognize it as the creative plane in action, a mind fully unified around a clear vision, freed from the drag of competitive anxiety, aligned with the organizing intelligence of the formless substance. The creator's secret is not working harder or longer. It is working in this state consistently by maintaining the conditions that produce it: clear vision, absolute faith in infinite supply, and the elimination of competitive friction. There is also a relational dimension to the elimination of friction that deserves attention. When you are operating on the competitive plane, your relationships with other people in your industry are inherently adversarial at some level, even when coated in professional courtesy. You are watching them. They are watching you. The interactions are calibrated. The information is guarded. The collaboration is strategic rather than genuine. This adversarial relational fabric is itself a source of friction, a drain on the creative energy you could otherwise be pouring into your vision. When you ascend to the creative plane, this changes at the root. You are no longer a competitor to anyone in your industry because you are not trying to take what they have. You are creating something new, something that did not exist before you imagined it. This makes genuine collaboration, genuine information sharing, and genuine mutual support not just possible, but natural. And the compounding effect of genuine collaboration, where multiple creative minds work in aligned, undefended concert, is perhaps the most powerful force multiplier available to human beings engaged in the project of wealth creation. The relationship between friction and fear is worth examining one final time before we move forward. Friction, in every dimension we have explored, whether attentional, energetic, decisional, or relational, is ultimately generated by fear. Fear of losing position. Fear of being overtaken. Fear of missing the opportunity. Fear that the supply will run out before you get yours. Every form of competitive friction traces back to this single root, and this is why Wattles' solution to friction is not a tactical adjustment, but a philosophical transformation. You cannot eliminate friction by managing fear more skillfully. You eliminate it by removing the false premise that fear was protecting you from, the premise of scarcity. When scarcity is genuinely understood to be a lie, fear loses its object and friction loses its source. What remains in the clean and quiet space after the friction has gone is the full creative force of a human mind aligned with an infinite supply, moving forward at a speed that the competitive mind, burning in its arena, can barely imagine. Wattles issues one of his most precise and demanding directives on this point, and it is worth meeting that precision with equal seriousness. He instructs the student of the creative way to stop reading the gloomy financial news. Stop monitoring your competitors. Stop engaging with the literature of shortage, whether it comes dressed as economic analysis, industry reporting, or well-meaning advice from competitive peers. This instruction sounds at first like willful ignorance, like the ostrich head in the sand approach to an uncomfortable reality. But examine it structurally, and it reveals itself to be something far more sophisticated. It is the instruction of an engineer who understands that certain inputs corrupt certain systems. You do not run clean water through a pipe coated in rust and expect it to remain clean. And you do not run your creative thinking through a mind coated in competitive anxiety and expect it to produce clear, powerful impressions on the formless substance. The mental blinders Wattles prescribes are not a rejection of reality. They are a precise definition of which reality is relevant to the Creator's purpose. The reality of infinite supply is relevant. The reality of your clear mental vision is relevant. The reality of the specific actions available to you in the present moment is relevant. The reality of what your competitor did last Tuesday, the reality of the latest economic forecast, the reality of the industry trends that suggest your market is shrinking, none of these are relevant to the Creator's mechanics, because the Creator is not operating within those constraints. He is not competing for a share of the existing market. He is drawing new value into existence from the formless substance, which does not read economic forecasts and is entirely indifferent to competitive positioning reports. Feeding your mind with competitive information is feeding a system that you are actively trying to dismantle. It is architectural self-sabotage. Consider the practical mechanics of how competitive information actually affects your thinking in real time. When you read that a competitor has launched a new product, a cascade of reactions begins in the competitive mind. First, evaluation. How does this affect my position? Second, comparison. Are they ahead of me now? Third, response planning. What should I do to counter this? Each of these reactions is a withdrawal from your creative energy account. Each one pulls your focus backward and sideways, away from your forward-moving vision. And the information that triggered this cascade is, in the Creator's framework, genuinely irrelevant. The formless substance is not going to give your competitor's customers to someone else because your competitor launched a product. There are more customers to create, more value to introduce, more wealth to generate from the infinite supply. But you cannot access that awareness while your mind is in the grip of competitive reaction. The two mental states are mutually exclusive. Now, Wattles does not mean that you should be uninformed about the world or that practical knowledge of your field has no value. There is a distinction between information that serves your creative vision and information that feeds the competitive anxiety. If learning about a new technology helps you deliver more use value to the people you serve, that knowledge is in service of creation. If reading about that same technology is primarily a measurement of how far behind or ahead you are relative to your competitors, it is in service of competition. The same information can serve either purpose depending on the mental state in which it is received. The Creator's discipline is not the discipline of ignorance. It is the discipline of relevance, rigorously directing attention toward what serves the vision and rigorously excluding what serves only the anxiety. There is a physiological dimension to this discipline that modern neuroscience would likely recognize as well-founded. The chronic state of competitive vigilance, the perpetual monitoring of threats and rivals that defines the competitive mind, activates the body's stress response system in a low-grade but continuous way. The human nervous system was not designed for chronic activation of its threat response mechanisms, and the cognitive and physiological costs of this chronic activation are enormous. Sustained cortisol elevation impairs the precise mental functions that creative work requires: long-range planning, imaginative synthesis, nuanced judgment, and the kind of expansive, associative thinking that generates genuine innovation. The competitive mind is, quite literally, running its creative apparatus in degraded mode. The Creator's blinders are not just a philosophical preference, they are a physiological prescription for keeping the creative brain in the optimal state for the work it needs to do. This brings us to an important practical question. What do you actually do with your attention when you put the competitive blinders on? The answer Wattles gives is both simple and demanding. You fix your attention entirely on your vision, on the clear mental image of the specific thing you are creating, and on the actions immediately available to you that advance that creation. This is the discipline of keeping the front windshield clean while leaving the side windows dark. You are not driving blind. You are driving with maximum clarity in the one direction that matters, forward. And forward in the creator's framework is not defined by what is ahead of your competitors. It is defined by the full realization of your specific vision, the complete manifestation of the thing you are impressing upon the formless substance. That is your only horizon. That is your only navigation point. Everything else is distraction. The practicality of this focus becomes even more apparent when you consider the compounding nature of undivided creative attention over time. A mind that gives 80% of its attention to its creative vision and 20% to competitive monitoring is not 80% as effective as a mind that gives 100% to its vision. It is far less than that, because the 20% devoted to competitive monitoring actively interferes with the 80% devoted to creation. It introduces anxiety into the creative state, which degrades its quality and disrupts its consistency. A truly undivided creative focus, maintained over weeks and months, compounds in the same way that financial interest compounds. Each day of pure creative attention builds on the last. Each clear impression on the formless substance deepens the channel. Each act of efficient action aligned with the vision adds to the momentum of what is being built. And the contrast between this compounding trajectory and the flat, friction-ridden progress of the competitive mind becomes, over time, so dramatic that it appears almost miraculous to those who have not understood its mechanics. Now let us address the objection that always surfaces at this point. What about being caught off guard? What about the competitor who innovates while you are looking the other way, who takes your market, who undercuts your price, who moves faster because you were not watching? This objection reveals, with elegant precision, the depth to which the competitive premise is still operating. The creator does not have a market that can be taken because the creator is not holding territory in a competitive landscape. He is generating new value, which by definition cannot be taken by a competitor. You cannot steal a customer who has never existed until you create the value that calls them into being. The innovations of your competitors are irrelevant to your creative process, not because they do not exist, but because your wealth is not coming from the same supply they are drawing from. You are both drawing from the infinite source, and the source does not have a limitation that makes their draw diminish yours. It is worth sitting with the absurdity of the alternative to really feel how much energy the competitive vigilance actually costs. Imagine spending 30 minutes every morning reading reports about what your rivals are doing. Multiply that by 250 working days a year. That is 125 hours of competitive monitoring annually. Hours in which you are not creating, not impressing the formless substance with your vision, not taking efficient action toward your goal, but cataloging threats and calibrating your anxiety. Over 5 years, that is more than 600 hours, which is the equivalent of 15 full working weeks. 15 weeks of your most alert, most available mental energy, poured into a process that generates no new value whatsoever, that does not create a single product, a single customer, a single dollar of new wealth. It merely redistributes your anxiety. The creator's blinders do not cost you anything. They give you back 15 weeks of your life per 5-year cycle, and they give them back to you charged with creative purpose. The final dimension of the creator's blinders is their effect on courage. There is a particular kind of boldness that becomes available to you when you stop measuring your progress against your competitors. The competitive mind is perpetually calibrating its ambition against the perceived level of the competition. It sets its goals at the level of beating the market, outperforming the average, doing slightly better than the best-known competitor. But the creator, who is not competing with anyone, has no external ceiling to calibrate against. His vision is not constrained by what the competition has achieved or what the market has historically produced. He is, in the most literal sense, drawing wealth from an infinite source, and his only constraint is the clarity and boldness of his own mental image. This is why the greatest creative leaps in human history, the innovations that did not merely improve on existing products, but called entirely new categories of value into being, were made by people who were, In the most fundamental sense, not thinking about their competition at all. They were thinking about their vision. That is the creator's blinders at their most powerful. That is focus at its most generative. There is a principle embedded in Wattles's science that serves as both the ethical foundation and the mechanical governor of the creative plane, and it is stated with a directness that deserves careful examination. Wattles calls it the rule of increase. The creator gets rich, not by taking from others, but by giving every person who interacts with him more in use value than he receives in cash value. This is not a charitable amendment to a fundamentally competitive system. It is a structural law of the creative plane, as fundamental as any of its other principles. And understanding why this is so, at the level of mechanics rather than just morality, is essential to understanding why the creator's wealth grows, at a rate that the competitive mind, with its zero-sum arithmetic, cannot model or predict. Begin with the basic transaction. In the conventional competitive model, a transaction is a negotiation between opposing interests. The buyer wants to pay as little as possible. The seller wants to receive as much as possible. The price is the compromise at which their opposing interests temporarily align. The fundamental dynamic is adversarial, a tug of war in which every inch of rope represents a dollar transferred from one party to another. In this model, value is not created by the transaction. It is merely reallocated, and both parties leave with a slightly competitive residue, a sense that they gave slightly more than they should have or received slightly less than they deserved. The cumulative emotional economy of a life lived in these transactions is one of perpetual mild dissatisfaction, which is precisely the emotional signature of the competitive plane. Now consider the creator's transaction. The creator has designed his product, service, or contribution to deliver a use value that genuinely exceeds the cash value exchanged. When this is true, the transaction does not merely reallocate value, it creates it. The customer leaves with more than they brought in. The total wealth in the immediate economic ecosystem has increased. And this increase is not illusory. If a carpenter charges you $100 to build a piece of furniture that will last 40 years, and that brings daily functionality and aesthetic pleasure into your home, the use value of that furniture over its lifetime vastly exceeds the $100 paid. That difference is new wealth, created by the carpenter's craft, introduced into the world by the transaction. The competitive carpenter charges you the maximum the market will bear and delivers the minimum the contract requires. The creative carpenter delivers the finest work his craft can produce and prices it for accessibility. Over the span of a career, which model generates more wealth for the carpenter and for everyone he touches? The rule of increase has a compounding dynamic that becomes more visible over time. Every customer who leaves a transaction with a creator carries a surplus of use value, a genuine net gain in their life circumstances. This surplus generates goodwill, loyalty, referral, and the kind of authentic word-of-mouth endorsement that no competitive marketing budget can replicate or purchase. The customer who feels they received more than they paid for becomes an advocate, not because they were recruited to be one, but because the natural human response to receiving genuine value is the desire to share the source of that value with others. This is the creator's organic growth mechanism, a continuously expanding network of genuinely enriched people, each of whom is a living demonstration of the wealth-creating capacity of the creative plane. Now extend this principle beyond the direct customer relationship to every other relational node in the creator's ecosystem. The employees who work for a true creator are not costs to be minimized in a competitive labor market. They are people whose development, compensation, and work experience represent an investment in the rule of increase. An employee who is paid generously, developed skillfully, and treated with genuine respect leaves every day carrying a surplus of use value received from their work relationship. That surplus is expressed in loyalty, initiative, craftsmanship, and the kind of discretionary effort that cannot be written into a contract or enforced by threat. A competitor who sees wages as costs to be minimized and is therefore perpetually managing turnover, training new people, and compensating for the disengagement of undervalued workers is consuming enormous resources in friction that the creator has entirely eliminated by applying the rule of increase to his employment relationships. The suppliers and vendors in the creator's network are subject to the same principle. The creator who pays promptly, communicates clearly, treats suppliers as partners in the creation of value rather than adversaries in a cost negotiation, and gives them more in the quality of the relationship than they expected to receive, generates a different quality of supply than the competitive purchaser, who squeezes every contract and pays every invoice as late as contractually permissible. The supplier who feels genuinely valued and fairly treated is the supplier who prioritizes your orders, flags quality issues before they become problems, offers you the best new materials first, and goes the extra distance when you are in a crisis. You cannot buy this quality of supply relationship with competitive pricing leverage. You build it by applying the rule of increase to the supply side of your value chain. And in doing so, you transform what the competitive mind sees as a cost structure into what the creator's mind sees as a wealth-amplifying network. There is a dimension of the rule of increase that extends beyond business transactions to the level of social impact, and Wattles is explicit about this. He states that the creator gets rich in such a way that when he achieves his wealth, every other person has more than they had before. This is not a consequence of his wealth creation that he tolerates for public relations purposes. It is a structural property of the creative plane. When you introduce new value into the world, when you create a product that genuinely improves lives, a service that genuinely solves problems, an innovation that genuinely advances human capability, the total available wealth in the world increases. Not the money supply in the narrow monetary sense, but the real wealth, the total quantity of life, convenience, health, beauty, and capability available to human beings. And this total increase is the proof of the formless substance's claim, that the supply is infinite, that creation adds without subtracting, and that a world inhabited by creators is richer than a world inhabited by competitors by a factor that cannot be expressed in any competitive arithmetic. This is also the answer to the most moralistic objection to wealth accumulation, that getting rich necessarily requires taking from others. On the competitive plane, this objection has genuine force. Competitive wealth often does involve taking, extracting, displacing, and diminishing others for personal gain. But on the creative plane, the objection simply does not apply. The creator's wealth is evidence of the value he has added to the world. His fortune is not a reservoir of extracted resources. It is a measure, however imperfect, of the net increase in total wealth that his creative vision has introduced. Every person who ever found genuine value in his product, every employee who grew under his employ, every community that was enriched by the economic activity he generated, these are the real currency of the rule of increase, and they validate the creator's wealth not as a moral concession, but as a structural confirmation. Now you might ask, is it always possible to give more in use value than you take in cash value? What if your industry does not allow for it? What if competitive market dynamics force prices so low that margins are insufficient to support genuine quality? This question itself reveals a competitive premise lurking within it. It assumes that the creator must operate within the constraints of existing competitive markets, that he must price his offering against the lowest competitor's price and deliver value within the margins that competitive pressure allows. But the creator does not set his offering against the competitor's offering. He creates a new category of value, something that did not previously exist in the market, something that is not directly comparable to what competitors offer, because he is not trying to take their customers. He is drawing new customers into existence by creating value they did not previously know was available to them. In this new category, there is no competitive floor for pricing and no competitive constraint on quality. There is only the creative vision and the infinite supply that supports it. There is something deeply practical about the rule of increase that transcends its philosophical elegance. It is self-reinforcing and self-sustaining in a way that competitive models are not. The competitive model requires constant external vigilance and constant escalation to maintain its position, because the competitive advantage today is the baseline of tomorrow, and someone is always trying to undercut it. The creative model, by contrast, generates its own momentum. Each application of the rule of increase, deepens the trust, goodwill, loyalty, and collaborative network of the creator, which in turn increases his capacity to create more value, which deepens the trust and goodwill further. It is a virtuous spiral, the mechanical opposite of the competitive arms race. The creator does not have to work harder each year to maintain his wealth. He works more effectively because the system he has built through consistent application of the rule of increase becomes more productive with every cycle. This is the wealth that Wattles is pointing toward, not merely financial accumulation, but the construction of a self-amplifying creative ecosystem from which the rewards, financial and otherwise, flow with increasing ease and increasing abundance over time. There is a tell that gives away the competitive mind even in its most sophisticated and self-aware form, and it is the quality of its relationship with time. The competitive person is always in a hurry, not the productive urgency of someone who loves their work and is eager to progress, but the specific, anxious, compulsive hurry of someone who is afraid of being too late, afraid that the opportunity will close, afraid that the competitor will arrive first, afraid that the window the market has briefly opened will shut before they can get through it. This hurry is not merely an inconvenience or a personal quirk. It is a mechanical symptom of the competitive framework. When you believe that wealth is scarce and that others are competing for the same finite supply, time becomes a weapon being wielded against you. Every moment you are not actively competing is a moment in which you are losing ground. The clock is not a neutral measure of progress. It is a countdown to loss. Examine what this temporal anxiety actually does to the quality of your creative work, and you begin to see its true cost. Panic-driven decisions are almost never the best decisions. The business built in frantic response to competitive pressure, launched before it is ready, priced to undercut rather than to reflect genuine value, marketed with desperation rather than confidence, carries the structural weaknesses of its hurried construction. It is the architectural equivalent of building a house at double speed because you are afraid someone else will buy the land. The foundation is shallow. The corners are cut. The craftsmanship is absent because craftsmanship requires the kind of patient, absorbed attention that panic makes impossible. And then the competitive entrepreneur, looking at his rushed creation, failing to perform, concludes that he must work even harder and move even faster, not understanding that the speed itself is a primary cause of the underperformance. Wattles speaks to this with a clarity that is almost bracing. He tells you that the creator never hurries, and the reason is not temperamental but structural. The creator knows that there is no shortage of opportunity. If a specific opportunity is not available today, the formless substance can generate another one tomorrow or the day after, in the same way that a garden can always produce more fruit, not the same fruit, not from the same branch, but more fruit, because the capacity to generate it is a property of the system and not a property of any single opportunity. When you truly understand that opportunities are as inexhaustible as the formless substance that generates them, the competitive panic about timing dissolves. You are not racing to catch the last train. You are the engineer of a locomotive that runs on an infinite fuel supply and can depart whenever the engine is properly prepared. This shift in temporal orientation has a profound effect on the quality of judgment. Calm, unhurried judgment is qualitatively different from panic-driven judgment, not just in its emotional texture, but in its structural reliability. The calm mind can see further because it is not restricted to the narrow, threat-focused visual field of the stressed nervous system. It can hold multiple considerations simultaneously without the urgency pressure forcing premature resolution. It can wait for additional information without the anxiety of believing that waiting is fatal. It can recognize when an apparent opportunity is not actually aligned with the creative vision and decline it without the fear that declining anything means losing everything. Every one of these capabilities is a competitive advantage of extraordinary magnitude, and every one of them is a function of the creator's serene relationship with time, which is itself a direct consequence of understanding the infinite supply. Consider the negotiating table as a microcosm of this principle. The competitive negotiator walks in with a deadline, real or perceived, which the opposing party can detect and exploit. The competitive negotiator's hurry is visible in his language, his body, his willingness to concede when concession is not necessary, his inability to wait comfortably for the other side to move. He has given the other party, unknowingly, one of the most powerful negotiating tools available, the knowledge that time is working against him. The creative negotiator walks in with exactly the opposite energetic signature. He is genuinely unhurried, not as a performance strategy, but as a natural expression of his understanding that if this particular deal does not serve his vision at the right terms, another deal will appear, because the formless substance is not running out of deals any more than it is running out of anything else. This unhurried quality is not passivity. It is the supreme confidence of someone who knows he is drawing from an infinite well. The relationship between hurry and fear of loss is so direct that eliminating one essentially eliminates the other. Fear of loss is the engine that drives competitive hurry. You hurry because you are afraid of losing the opportunity, the deal, the market share, the window of advantage. Remove the belief that loss is possible in the absolute sense, that the formless substance will withhold its abundance because you moved too slowly or missed a specific opening, and the engine of hurry has no fuel. What remains in its absence is not lassitude or indifference. What remains is the steady, purposeful, absorbed forward motion of the creator, who is not running away from loss, but moving toward his vision. The difference in velocity is counterintuitive. The unhurried creator, free from the friction of competitive panic, typically moves faster in terms of actual progress than the frantic competitor who is burning enormous energy in anxiety rather than in creation. There is a rhythm Wattles describes in natural growth that applies directly to the creator's work, and that explains why patient confidence is not merely emotionally superior to competitive hurry, but is mechanically superior in terms of outcomes. In any natural growth process, there are visible phases and invisible phases. The seed sprouting beneath the soil, the embryo developing before it is born, the strategic groundwork of a business before it generates revenue. These are invisible phases, periods in which enormous amounts of growth are occurring, but no external evidence is yet available. The competitive mind, conditioned to measure progress by visible external metrics, is constitutionally incapable of functioning well during invisible phases. It interprets the absence of visible progress as evidence of failure and responds with either abandonment or panic-driven acceleration, both of which disrupt the organic process. The creator, who understands the rhythm of visible and invisible phases, maintains his calm and consistent action through both, knowing that the invisible growth is real and that it will become visible in its own proper time. This patience is not passive waiting. It is active, engaged, consistent forward movement without the emotional charge of urgency. It is the daily tending of the garden with full confidence that the harvest is coming, not because you are monitoring the plants anxiously, not because you are pulling them upward to make them grow faster, but because you have planted good seeds in prepared soil, and the nature of the system guarantees the result. Each day you water, each day you weed, each day you do the specific action that is appropriate to today's phase of the growth. And you do it calmly, completely and with full confidence, because you are not trying to force a schedule imposed by competitive anxiety. You are honoring the organic schedule of the formless substance, which knows far better than your competitive fear how long a thing takes to grow into its full expression. Now let us apply this to the specific experience most people have at the beginning of a creative endeavor, before the results are visible, before the income is established, before the external world has confirmed what the internal vision has already committed to. This is the crucible moment, the phase at which most creative projects are abandoned, usually under the pressure of competitive comparison. You look at someone who is already where you intend to be, and the gap between their current position and yours activates the competitive fear that you are too far behind, that the opportunity has already been claimed, that you are too late. This is the moment at which the creator's understanding of infinite supply is not merely philosophically useful, but life-altering. There is no too late on the creative plane. There is no claim that has been staked in the formless substance that prevents you from staking your own. Every vision, held clearly and pursued with patient, efficient action, has access to the same infinite supply that supplied every creative achievement in human history. You are not too late. You are simply not yet visible. There is a beautiful paradox that Wattles' work illuminates here, which is that the creator's calmness is often perceived by competitive observers as a form of arrogance or naivety. They see someone who is not visibly competing, not reading the industry reports, not reacting to competitive moves with urgency, and they interpret the absence of competitive anxiety as a failure to appreciate the seriousness of the landscape. What they are actually observing is something far more sophisticated, the behavior of a person who has genuinely understood that the landscape they are all fighting over is not the relevant landscape for the creator's purposes. The creator's calmness is not the calmness of ignorance. It is the calmness of someone who knows where the kitchen is, who has already started baking, and who is entirely undisturbed by the noise from the arena, because the arena is simply no longer his concern. Consider what the creator's relationship with failure looks like within this temporal framework. On the competitive plane, failure is catastrophic because it signals lost ground that competitors will permanently occupy. If you fail while competing, your rivals advance and the gap between you and them widens in a way that is difficult to reverse. But on the creative plane, failure has an entirely different quality. Because the creator is not competing for a finite share of existing wealth, a failed attempt does not mean someone else has captured what should have been his. It means the formless substance has provided information about what does not work, which is a necessary step in the iterative process of clarifying what does. Thomas Edison's 10,000 attempts to create a functioning light bulb are not 10,000 competitive losses. They are 10,000 refinements of the impression being made on the formless substance, each one more precise than the last. The creator's relationship with failure is therefore not the desperate competitive dread of lost ground, but the patient, curious interest of an engineer refining a system. This is also why Wattles insists that the creator must continue to act with confident efficiency, even when results are not immediately visible. The action is not a test of whether the system is working. The action is a component of the system. The daily efficient action aligned with the creative vision is itself part of the impression being made on the formless substance. It is the physical dimension of the creative process, the part that operates in the manifest world and that allows the organizing intelligence of the substance to arrange the specific circumstances and channels through which the vision will manifest. To stop acting because you cannot yet see the results is to remove a load-bearing element from the structure while it is still being built. The creator continues to act calmly, consistently, and with full creative confidence during the invisible phase as during the visible, because he understands that the system is working even when the evidence is not yet external. The integration of patience and creative urgency, the understanding that there is no need to hurry and yet every reason to act consistently and fully, is perhaps the most counterintuitive and most powerful quality of the creator's relationship with time. Modern culture, saturated as it is with competitive thinking, has conflated urgency with hurry and patience with passivity in ways that are deeply unhelpful. Wattles' science dissolves this conflation precisely. Urgency in the creative sense means giving the present moment your full, undivided, passionate engagement. It means acting now completely on whatever is available in this moment, not because you are afraid of being too late, but because the present moment is the only place in which creation actually occurs. Patience means trusting the natural rhythm of the system without anxiety about its timeline. You can be both fully urgent in your present action and completely patient about the timeline of results, because these two qualities, far from being contradictory, are the two dimensions of the creator's perfect relationship with time. Finally, consider the cumulative effect of a life lived in this temporal relationship. The competitive life is characterized by a chronic low-grade emergency that never fully resolves, because the competitive landscape never stabilizes in a way that removes the threat of loss. There is always a newer competitor, always a shifting market, always a new threat to be monitored and responded to. The emotional experience of this life, regardless of its material outcomes, is exhausting. The creative life is characterized by the progressive deepening of a productive calm, a growing confidence that comes not from external validation, but from the deepening understanding of the system within which you are operating. Each creative success confirms the mechanics of the formless substance. Each efficient action builds the channel through which abundance flows. Each patient holding of the vision through an invisible phase strengthens the faith that makes the next impression clearer and more powerful. The creator does not burn out. He compounds, and the wealth he accumulates, financial and otherwise, is not a trophy earned in an exhausting battle. It is the natural overflow of a life lived in creative alignment with an infinite supply. If the creator's relationship with time is the structural proof of his understanding of infinite supply, then gratitude is the emotional and philosophical lock that seals that understanding in place. Wattles does not present gratitude as a pleasant add-on to his science, a spiritual seasoning sprinkled over an otherwise practical recipe. He presents it as a functional mechanism, as integral to the creative process as the clear mental image or the efficient action. To understand why, you must first understand what gratitude does to the mind at its most basic level. Genuine gratitude, not the performed gratitude of social ritual, but the deep, settled recognition of abundance received and abundance available, is the emotional state that is most perfectly incompatible with the competitive mind. You cannot simultaneously feel genuinely thankful for the abundance in your life and genuinely afraid that it is about to run out. The two states are as mutually exclusive as light and darkness. Where one is truly present, the other cannot exist. This is the functional logic of Wattles's prescription. When you cultivate deep habitual gratitude for the abundance already present in your life, for the intelligence of the formless substance, for the infinite supply that underlies all experience, you are maintaining your mind in a state that is structurally incompatible with the competitive framework. You are at the level of habitual thought, constantly reaffirming the truth of infinite supply, not through intellectual repetition, but through the deeper, more pervasive medium of emotional experience. Felt gratitude for abundance is the most powerful possible antidote to the experiential grip of scarcity thinking. It is the tool the creator uses, not to suppress competitive thoughts when they arise, but to live in a register of experience in which competitive thoughts have no natural home. Consider the mechanics of this in relation to what we know about the formless substance. If the substance is responsive to thought, and if it reads the full quality of the impression made upon it, including the emotional frequency in which the thought is held, then a thought of creative vision held in the context of genuine gratitude is a fundamentally different and more powerful impression than the same thought held in the context of anxious desire. Desire without gratitude is essentially the same grammar as scarcity. I want what I do not yet have, which implies that what I have is insufficient. This implication, however subtle, is a competitive frequency. It is the echo of the sealed room. Desire held within gratitude, the combination of clear creative vision and genuine thankfulness for the infinite supply that is already committed to delivering it, is the purest form of the creative impression. It is the frequency at which the creator operates when his system is fully aligned. Wattles makes a specific and striking claim about the mechanics of gratitude that is worth examining carefully. He says that the more gratefully we fix our minds on the supreme, on the infinite supply, on the formless substance, the more good things we draw to ourselves and the more rapidly they come. He is not making a motivational claim here. He is making a mechanical one. Gratitude accelerates manifestation. The reason, mechanically, is that gratitude maintains the most consistent and least interrupted quality of alignment between the creator's mind and the formless substance. Every moment of genuine gratitude is a moment of pure, clean signal with no competitive static. And consistent, uninterrupted alignment is the condition under which the substance organizes most rapidly and most powerfully in response to the creator's impression. Gratitude is, in this sense, the tuner of the receiver, the mechanism that locks the creator's frequency onto the substance's broadcast and holds it there without drift. There is also a deeply practical social dimension to the creator's gratitude that is easy to overlook in the more abstract philosophical treatment of the subject. The creator who is genuinely grateful is not merely feeling a pleasant internal emotion. he is existing in a specific quality of relationship with every person, situation, and resource in his life that is detectably different from the competitive attitude. The competitive mind, perpetually calculating advantage and disadvantage, treats everything and everyone as either a resource to be extracted or a threat to be managed. The grateful creator treats everything and everyone as a gift, as an expression of the infinite supply working through specific channels. This quality of relationship is experienced by others as a kind of generosity of attention and appreciation that is rare and extraordinarily attractive. People want to do business with, work for, collaborate with, and refer others to a person who genuinely appreciates what they bring. The Creator's gratitude is, therefore, not only a spiritual alignment practice, but a social and commercial force multiplier of the first order. The integration of gratitude into the Creator's daily practice is perhaps the most demanding and most transformative of all the disciplines Wattles prescribes, not because it requires great effort, but because it requires genuine, sustained sincerity. You cannot manufacture gratitude for commercial purposes and expect it to function as the lock that seals your alignment with infinite supply. The formless substance, being a perfect reader of the quality of thought, recognizes performed gratitude as a form of competitive manipulation, an attempt to hack the system rather than genuinely align with it. Real gratitude comes from real understanding. When you truly, architecturally understand that the supply is infinite, that the universe is not your adversary but your most generous partner, that every creative achievement you have already made was drawn from a source that has not been diminished by it in the slightest, then gratitude is not a practice you must remind yourself to perform. It is the natural, spontaneous, emotional response to the truth of your situation. It arises from comprehension, and it sustains comprehension. It is both the fruit of understanding and the seed of deeper understanding, a self-reinforcing cycle that progressively deepens the Creator's alignment with the creative plane until that alignment becomes the default condition of his existence. We have now traveled the full distance of Wattles' science, from the sealed room to the infinite kitchen, from the grammar of scarcity to the mechanics of abundance, from the competitive plane to the creative plane. And standing here at the summit of this journey, the view it offers of human potential, of your potential, is both humbling and profoundly liberating. The synthesis of everything we have examined resolves to a single staggering realization. You are not in a race against other human beings. You never were. The race was a story, a narrative constructed on the false premise of a finite pie, and like all stories built on false premises, it generated real suffering in the lives of real people who believed it too completely to question it. The man who has genuinely internalized Wattles' science does not walk away from the race having finally beaten his competitors. He walks away understanding that the race was never the right game, and that the right game, the game of creation in partnership with an infinite and intelligent formless substance, has no competitors at all. The partnership with the cosmos that Wattles describes is not a metaphor for a positive attitude. It is a functional description of the relationship between a clear, creative human mind and the infinite, intelligent medium that constitutes the universe. When you hold a clear vision, act efficiently upon the physical opportunities that arise, give more in use value than you take in cash value, maintain your focus on the forward direction of your creation rather than the lateral direction of competition, and keep your mind tethered to infinite supply through genuine and unshakable gratitude, you are not hoping that the universe will cooperate. You are operating in alignment with the mechanics of how it actually works. The universe is not indifferent to the quality of your alignment. It responds with the same certainty as every other natural system. Correctly applied mechanics produce reliable results every time, without exception, for every person who applies them. The gladiators in the arena are not your enemies. They are, in the most sympathetic sense, tragic figures, capable, energetic, often brilliant men and women, burning their lives in a fight that was never necessary and that no one wins in any permanent sense. Every gladiatorial victory in the competitive arena is temporary, because the arena is infinite in its capacity to generate new threats, new rivals, new disruptions. The man who fights his way to the top of a competitive hierarchy today will be fighting to stay there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until he dies or is displaced. There is no rest on the competitive plane because the premise of scarcity that drives it is never satisfied. You cannot finally win a war against shortage because shortage is not an external condition. It is a framework, a lens, and it regenerates the experience of scarcity regardless of the external circumstances. The gladiator who earns $1 million continues to feel the scarcity of someone in a sealed room because the room is in his mind, and he has never learned that the door exists. You, having understood what this documentary has offered, are now standing at the door. You can see the kitchen. You know the ingredients are infinite. You know the mechanics of baking. The only question remaining is whether you will walk through, and that question is not about courage in the dramatic sense. It is about the depth and sincerity of your comprehension. The creator does not need to summon heroic willpower to exit the arena. He exits because the arena has become, at the level of genuine understanding, simply no longer relevant to what he is building. You are the architect. You have always been the architect. The only thing that was ever between you and the blueprint was the false belief that the materials were finite. Wallace Wattles delivers his central decree with a simplicity and a directness that carries the weight of a law of nature rather than a motivational sentiment. He states, "You are to become a creator, not a competitor. You are going to get what you want, but in such a way that when you get it, every other person will have more than he has now." Sit with the second sentence, because it is the most radical statement in the entire science. It is not saying that you should share your wealth out of generosity once you have earned it, nor that you should be philanthropic as a compensatory act for having accumulated. It is saying something far more structurally profound. The very method by which you acquire your wealth, the creative method, is itself a process that increases total wealth in the world. Your enrichment is not a neutral event for others. It is a net positive event for others. You cannot get rich on the creative plane without everyone connected to you becoming richer in the process. This decree collapses the entire philosophical foundation of the guilt that many people carry around the desire for wealth. The competitive model of wealth creation carries a moral shadow, because on the competitive model, every act of enrichment does involve some form of extraction, some displacement or diminishment of another party. This shadow is real, and those who sense it are sensing something true about the competitive plane. But they have made the error of attributing that shadow to wealth itself, rather than to the competitive method of acquiring it. Wattles is separating the method from the outcome with surgical precision. Wealth in itself is not morally ambiguous. Competitive wealth accumulation may well be, but creative wealth accumulation is, by its structural definition, a net benefit to the world. The more you create, the more everyone has. This is not ideology. This is mechanics. Consider what it means for your inner relationship with ambition. How many people have suppressed their creative potential out of a vague but persistent guilt about wanting more than others have? How many genuinely talented creative minds have held themselves back from the full expression of their vision because they unconsciously associated their own enrichment with someone else's diminishment? This suppression is itself a product of the competitive framework. It is the internalization of the zero-sum logic, which says that your having more must mean someone else is having less. When you genuinely internalize the rule of increase, this guilt loses its foundation. Your ambition is not a selfish act against the world. It is a creative act for the world. Every vision you bring into reality from the formless substance is a contribution to the total wealth available to every human being. Your expansion is the world's expansion. Your creation is the world's enrichment. You have not merely the permission, but the responsibility to want as much as you can, clearly envision and faithfully create. This responsibility is worth dwelling on, because it reframes the entire emotional valence of wealth pursuit in a way that the competitive framework never allows. On the competitive plane, wanting wealth is at best a necessary selfishness and at worst a moral failing. On the creative plane, wanting wealth is an act of creative engagement with the universe, a vote for more life, more expression, more beauty, more capability in the world. Wattles says this explicitly: the desire for wealth is the desire of life seeking fuller expression through you. You are not a greedy organism hoarding resources from other organisms. You are a creative intelligence through whom the infinite, formless substance is seeking to express more of its inexhaustible potential. Every vision you hold and every creation you bring to life is the universe becoming more of itself, through the specific, irreplaceable channel that is you. The Master's decree also contains an implicit understanding of legacy that is worth making explicit. The Creator who operates by the rule of increase leaves behind not merely financial wealth, but a transformed ecosystem. The employees who grew under his leadership carry that growth forward into every subsequent endeavor of their lives. The customers whose lives were genuinely improved by his products carry that improvement forward into their families, their communities, their own creative work. The suppliers and collaborators who were treated with generosity and respect carry that model of relationship forward and apply it in their own networks. The Creator's wealth is not merely the accumulated balance in his accounts. It is the entire ripple of increased abundance that his creative life set in motion, propagating outward through every person he touched in ways that cannot be fully measured and will not fully stop when he is gone. This is what Wattles means by getting rich in such a way that every other person has more. It is not a constraint on your getting rich. It is the description of what it means to get rich on the creative plane, where the supply is infinite and generosity is the mechanism through which it flows. There is a personal empowerment embedded in Wattles's decree that speaks directly to what the viewer of this documentary has the right to claim for themselves. You are not watching this because you are someone to whom wealth happens or does not happen based on luck, circumstance, or the kindness of a competitive world. You are watching this because you are a creator, whether you have fully activated that identity yet or not. The capacity for creative alignment with the formless substance is not a rare gift distributed to special individuals. It is the birthright of every human mind that has the courage and the comprehension to claim it. Wattles did not write a book for exceptional people. He wrote a book for every person willing to genuinely understand and apply the science it contains. And the science, as he insists, works with the same reliability as physics. The Creator is not a type of person. It is a relationship with reality. And every human being alive has the full and unconditional right to step into that relationship at any moment they choose. The moment has arrived. Not the end of a video, but the beginning of a decision. Every insight in this documentary, every principle we have traced from the foundations of the formless substance, through the mechanics of creation, through the blinders and the rule of increase, through the death of competitive hurry and the locking power of gratitude, all of it has been building toward a single concrete invitation. The invitation is not to think differently about wealth at some abstract, theoretical level. The invitation is to drop your sword, right now. Not metaphorically, not eventually, not when circumstances change, but now, in this moment, to put down the weapon of competitive thinking and pick up the blueprint of creative vision. The sword is heavy. You have been carrying it for so long that you may not even feel its weight anymore. But it is there, in every anxious scan of what your competitors are doing, in every scarcity calculation about whether there is enough time, money, opportunity, or market left for you, in every moment of resentment when you see someone else thriving in your field. That sword is the competitive mind, and it is not just a philosophical burden. It is a mechanical impediment to the precise process by which the formless substance delivers wealth to a prepared and aligned mind. Every day you carry it is a day your creative channel is narrowed by its weight. Putting it down does not leave you vulnerable. It leaves you free. Free to give your full, undivided, undistracted attention to the one thing that matters on the creative plane, your vision. The blueprint, by contrast, is the specific, detailed, deeply held mental image of the wealth you intend to create. Not a vague aspiration, but a precise and vivid picture. The business that introduces a new category of value to people whose lives it genuinely improves. The craft practiced to the level of mastery that delivers to its recipients something worth 10 times what they pay. The creative vision that draws new wealth into physical reality by impressing itself with clarity and faith upon a substance that is infinite, alive, and ready. This blueprint is yours to design, yours to hold, yours to act upon with the patient, efficient, forward-moving confidence of someone who knows the supply behind them is without limit. No one can give it to you. No one can take it from you. It exists in the same place where all creation begins, in the disciplined, faithful, creative mind. Now here is the challenge. Not a challenge of effort, but a challenge of sincerity. The challenge is to go back to your primary arena of wealth creation, whether that is your business, your career, your craft, your side project, your creative endeavor, and answer one question with ruthless honesty. Are you competing or are you creating? Are you measuring your progress against the position of rivals or against the clarity of your vision? Are you investing your energy in monitoring what others are doing or in deepening the quality of the value you are introducing to the world? Are you operating from the fear that the supply will run out or from the knowledge that the supply is infinite? This question is the doorway. Answering it honestly is the first step through. And the kitchen, the vast, fully equipped, ingredient-rich kitchen of the formless substance, is waiting on the other side. If this science has genuinely landed for you, if you feel not just intellectually informed, but structurally shifted by what you have received here today, then do one thing before you move on with your day. Write in the comments below, "I am a creator," not as a slogan or an affirmation to be forgotten in an hour. Write it as a declaration, as the public staking of a position, as the moment you chose to step off the competitive plane and begin the work of impressing your creative vision upon the formless substance. Every comment that carries those words is a creator announcing their arrival. It is an identity commitment made in public, and public identity commitments have a particular power to reshape habitual thought, to begin carving the new groove that Alan described, to tune the receiver to the frequency of the substance's infinite broadcast. Subscribe so that the next piece of this science reaches you when it is ready. Like this video so that the algorithm, which is itself a kind of formless substance responding to the collective impression of human engagement, places this wisdom in front of the next person who is ready to stop competing and start creating. And share it with someone whose arena you have watched them suffer in for too long, someone whose creative potential you have seen, someone who is holding a sword that is far too heavy for the kitchen they were always meant to inhabit. The gladiators can keep fighting. The arena will always be there for those who choose it. But you have seen the kitchen now. You know the door is real. The only thing remaining is to walk through it, pick up your blueprint, and begin.